Hi there, everyone. So I'm traveling. I'm in Las Cruces, New Mexico at the moment. I've been traveling for a couple of days. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm here in Las Cruces for my dad's memorial service events, which are taking place over the weekend. And so that's why you haven't heard from me, though I've been trying to make some recordings for you. Uh, while I've been along the way, there have been difficulties with the recording devices. So hopefully this works. Basically, what I want to do, I'm sending this out as an announcement. There are two things I want to cover here. One is I want to talk about the test that is due at 10:30 p.m. on Saturday, this Saturday. And then the other thing I want to do is to cover a term, modus bonehead, which is not in your text. That is an invention of mine that does appear on your test, so that you'll know what I'm talking about there. And in the process of talking about that, I'm going to have to talk about two of the key terms, modus ponens and modus tollens, that are in your textbook. And so hopefully with that, we'll do some clarification of that as well. All right, so here we go. First things first, with regard to the test that falls due this Saturday, I noticed that only 15 of the 31 of you in the class bothered to do the tech requirement testing the test kind of thing that was available to you last week. And basically the reason why I had you do that was just to make sure that you were comfortable with the Respondus Lockdown browser, that it was going to work okay on your system and so forth. You will need that Respondus Lockdown browser in order to take this test. At this stage, all I can say is good luck. Hope it works out. If you have any technical difficulties, as is always the case in this course, any difficulties with the technical aspects of transmitting and receiving information, then you will need to contact the IT people. They're your only hope. So I'm of no use to you with regard to any technical problems. And if you contact the IT people, then they will have a record of your having contacted them in the event that, I don't know, I try to give you a 0 for not having taken the exam. At least there will be some record that you did try. Okay, so good. So there's that. Now, also with regard to the level of difficulty of the test, remember that the first exam is always, and this is true in any class that you take, is always, an attempt on the part of the instructor to figure out how well you're, particularly in an online course, how well you're comprehending and retaining the information that is given to you through the assigned readings, any assignments that are offered, and through the lectures. So I'm trying to assess how well you're receiving the information, while you are trying to assess in the first exam what it is that you can expect from subsequent exams. And so it may end up, at least it's not unusual. I see a lot of people do badly on the first test, but I don't want you to worry about that, because I'm going to be looking at the sort of progress that you make through the course. So how you do on the subsequent tests will sort of dispose me to disregard and maybe rearrange the weight of the first test. I hope that makes sense. So I don't want you to think that if you bomb this test that it's therefore a kind of foregone conclusion that you will bomb the course, because that's just not the case. That's not how it works out. So I want you to do your best on the exam, obviously, and then we'll go from there. We'll work out how to give you the information, maybe in a different way or whatever, as we go along. Okay, so now with regard to modus bonehead, this is a term that I use, sort of tongue-in-cheek term, that refers to invalid arguments. So let me back up here. In the little logic portion that's contained in Chapter 2, you learn these two terms, modus ponens. Another name for that is affirming the antecedent. And modus tollens, another name for that, is denying the consequent. So if you'll remember in the structure of a statement, if P then Q, if P is the antecedent and then Q is the consequent of that sentence, okay? Right? So we're looking for validity, and validity is always about the form of the argument. You're checking for validity, generally speaking, before you're even looking at whether what's being said in the argument is true or not. That's really not relevant yet. The truth of what's being said isn't relevant yet. What the form of the argument entitles you to conclude is that if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. If it's a valid argument, it cannot be the case that the premises are true and the conclusion is false. So, for instance, if we say, let's use modus ponens, if we say if P then Q, and that's our first premise, then our second premise is P, we've asserted that P, so if P then Q, we've asserted that P, then we can conclude that Q, right? So hear this out. So if it's true that if P then Q, and we know that P, then we can conclude certainly that Q, okay? That's, so another way of saying about validity is that the premises compel the conclusion in a valid argument. Okay, so modus ponens, if we translate that into the everyday language, and there are reasons, I think, when we translate into everyday language, a lot of times we pick up on a kind of intuitive sense of what's being said and think that because of the confusion of ordinary language, think that we understand more than we actually understand. That's why we reduce it to if P then Q, because it's easier to detect whether the form is valid or not. Then we can go back to the ordinary language and say, okay, good, we have a valid argument then. And now we can look at whether these are true or not. So if we translate using modus ponens, if P then Q, if we translate that to if Betty's happy, then Paul's happy, and we know that Betty's happy, P, right, that Betty's happy, then we know that Paul's happy. So I want you to always be thinking about what's the extension of what's implied in the first premise, if P then Q, okay? Now, modus tollens, denying the consequent, would be in the form of if P then Q, that's your first premise. The second premise would be not Q, then your conclusion would be therefore not P. So if Betty's happy, then Paul's happy, first premise. Paul's not happy, second premise, then we know that Betty's not happy. That's a valid form. So the valid forms, modus ponens, affirming the antecedent, modus tollens, denying the consequent, are both valid forms. That is to say, if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. So they are valid, okay? Modus bonehead is where we go wrong a lot of times with our intuitions. So modus bonehead, if Betty's happy, then Paul's happy. Betty's not happy, then what's the conclusion? Intuitively, you might say, then Paul's not happy, but that's not really what we're given in the premise, right? What we're saying in the premise is that in every case, in every world where Betty is happy, then we will also find Paul happy. right? It doesn't say anything about other sort of instances in which Paul might be happy. It's only those instances where Betty's happy that we're assured that Paul is happy. So an instance of modus bonehead would be to say if P then Q, not P, therefore not Q, that's invalid. That is not a valid argument, okay? And likewise, if we affirm the consequent, so see what we've done there, we've inverted these, right? So if we affirm the consequent, if Betty's happy, then Paul's happy, then can we conclude that Betty's happy? No, we can't. That's an invalid form as well, okay? So again, look at the full implication of if P then Q, translated into regular language. If Betty's happy, then Paul's happy. We really haven't said anything about other possible situations, right, than the situation that where we find Betty happy, we're also going to find Paul happy. But that means that if we find Paul not happy, then we can equally rest assured that Betty's not happy, right? Okay, so, but that's not the exhaustion of Paul's unhappiness, right? There may be other things, or even Paul's happiness, right? There may be other things that Paul might be happy about that don't involve Betty at all, right? Okay, so that's modus bonehead. You'll notice that I posted a list of some of the German and Greek vocabulary that I was using and some of the translations that I offered there. That list will expand a bit. Okay, so good luck on the test. Don't worry about it. Okay, just do your best, and we'll see what happens afterwards. Okay. You also need to get your writing assignments in, a paragraph. I'm not going to be very picky about your adherence to any of the things that we have offered in terms of happiness yet. I'm just interested at this stage in seeing that you're thinking about it, okay, and seeing how well you write. All right, good. So best of luck. I'll be in touch in a couple of days. Okay.